Hi there, I'm Wills, and this is Wills Paints. As I said in a previous video, I'm on a mission to get my Leviathan box set Tyranids painted, and today I'd like to show you how I painted my Neurogaunts and Barbgaunts specifically, as I painted them in a 16 model batch. I'm following pretty much the same steps as in my Termagant video, but there were a couple instances where I felt the need to add colors to the palette or cut steps out, and I'll note them when they come up. First, we primed the models. I used Scale 75 sand primer this time. Previously, for the Termagant, I used a gray primer and then sprayed Agrax Earthshade over it, and then dry brushed with golden brown and then ivory after it. But this time around, I decided that I could cut a step out there. I did a little bit of experimenting and found that sand primer, Agrax Earthshade, and then dry brushing ivory gets a very close effect with less time spent. And less time spent is always our goal. So after priming the model, I then sprayed it with Agrax Earthshade and dry brushed ivory once it was dry. And that's the exoskeleton, a big chunk of the model done. The process for the red stayed the same. I used Pro-Acryl Burnt Red for the base coat over all armored bits. Then I used Coal Black to cover the claws and hooves as normal. Then, because several of these models had exposed brains, I painted any visible brain matter with Pro-Acryl Bright Ivory. After letting it totally dry, I covered the white brains with Talisar Blue contrast paint for an easy glowing blue brain effect. If you're batch painting, this won't be much of an issue for you, but you need to make sure that the ivory paint is absolutely dry before applying the Talisar blue contrast paint. You really do not want any amount of smearing on the white paint, so give it the time to dry. Then I used thinned down black paint to put lines between the carapace plates to define them individually, just as I did for the Termagants. Once that was totally dry, I painted little streaks with Pro-Acryl Bold Pyrrole Red on the carapace, moving from the darkened areas to the burnt red. Try to make these streaks irregular so as to appear organic. Now, I was painting the Neurogaunts and Barbgaunts at the same time, because the claws, hooves, and carapace are all going to be painted the same way along with the exoskeleton. But when it comes to the carapace and weapon, I needed to take a step back and assess how I was painting the Barbgaunt, because they and their weapons are sizable and fairly detailed. You can see that the weapon has carapace parts on it, but from images I've seen, a lot of people decided not to paint it the same color as carapace on the rest of the model. I decided not to do that. I thought the black exoskeleton on the weapon with green details was distinct enough. If you're new to miniature painting, I just want to note that if you're ever looking at your model and you see something and you're not sure exactly what it's supposed to be or what color it's supposed to be, Google search for painted versions of the model and find reference images that you can refer to. That is always helpful for finding direction. At this step, the Neurogaunts are essentially done. I just painted the shoulder, tail, and back of head with Guilliman Flesh contrast to darken them somewhat, and dotted those areas with Pro-Acryl Mahogany. That's pretty much the Neurogaunts dealt with. They are small and not terribly detailed. The Barbgaunts still had a few details to deal with, however. The exoskeleton, carapace, hooves, and claws and brains of the Barbgaunt were painted in substantially the same way as the Neurogaunts, but they hold much larger weapons and require a few more paints. When I was painting the hooves and claws Pro-Acryl Coal Black, I also painted the non-carapace parts of the weapon. There are many nooks and crannies here. Take your time. Once that was done, I pulled out the Pro-Acryl Purple to paint the tongues. Easy enough. Once the black is totally dry, I used Pro-Acryl Jade to pick out bits and pieces of the weapon. I personally painted the orbs and the projectile thing to distinguish them, but feel free to experiment here. It's a fictional organic alien weapon, and I've seen them painted a great many different ways. If you want the whole weapon to be pink, who's going to stop you? Nobody. I then did the same Guilliman flesh contrast over the points of contact between the carapace and brown modeling with pro-acryl mahogany. I was not going to do the teeth on the Barbgaunts, but as I was inspecting them later on, I felt that they were prominent enough and the model was large enough that they would be visibly unpainted on the finished model. So I used some bright ivory to deal with that. This is hardly necessary, but it's a nice to have. Once that was done, I decided that the jade wasn't bright enough to be eye-catching on this model, so I broke out the pro-acryl green and highlighted the center of the orbs, as well as the wiry vein things coming out from behind the head, and the slits in the exoskeleton and carapace. And that's pretty much the model done. I based it according to my Tyranid Army's standards, AK Interactive Dark Earth Paint, dry brushed with golden brown, and then adding flocking with white glue. Then coal black for the rim of the base, and these models are complete. I want to point out here that if you're aspiring to paint an army, that is often going to be a task of months or years, and it is almost completely inevitable that you're going to find new methods that work better or faster or are just more pleasing to you. And this will subtly or not so subtly change how your finished models look. This can be frustrating if you want total uniformity in your army, but my advice would be to not sweat the small stuff. Even if you stuck to the exact same methods as you're painting an army, the model count that we are dealing with here means that you are, if nothing else, just going to improve on doing those steps as you're working through your army. There will be dips and peaks in the painting quality. There's really not much you can do about that unless you can become a literal robot. So, anyway, that's how I painted my Barbgaunts and Neurogaunts. I have 2 Screamer Killers coming up next. I figure that's enough of the small bugs. Time to bring on some monsters. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you if I see you.